So recently, the Nordic countries have seen a few small but impactful shifts, like Sweden and Finland joining NATO, and it got us thinking about the region itself and what it's done in the past to band together during times of regional instability.
Yeah, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the aftermath of Brexit, new leadership elsewhere in the EU. It's not the first time in history that the Nordic countries and kingdoms have had to look around and been like, WT.
Frankly, Scandinavia and the Nordics have typically been deft at balancing the greater powers in their backyard. For example, Russia, Great Britain, Germany, over the years, just to name a few.
So what if we look back in history for a solution to the threats and instability that's around them? And what if the Kalmar Union reunited?
Now, a very oversimplified explanation of the Kalmar Union. Basically, the Kalmar Union existed between Denmark, Sweden, and Norway and lasted from 1397 to 1523. Besides these three modern nations, the Kalmar Union also included Greenland, Iceland, most of Finland, and the Faroe Islands, plus Orkney and Shetland, which are today part of Scotland's Northern Islands.
So basically, we're talking about Greenland and every other territory with some form of Nordic cross on their flag. And during that time, they were all in one happy family together, or at least the beginning.
Yeah, now the Union was founded as a way for the Scandinavian nobles to band together and to kind of fight the Hanseatic League from infringing on their spheres of influence in the Baltic Sea. The Union itself was sealed by the work of Danish Queen Margrethe I, who won a real-life Game of Thrones by taking over the crowns of Denmark, Norway, and then getting her nephew / adopted son, Eric of Pomerania, named the King of Sweden, also making her the heir as well.
You know, we really should do a whole video on Margrethe alone, but for now, let's just talk about the Kalmar Union and know that it lasted for more than 120 years, but they rarely were happy. The Swedes in particular chafed at being ruled by a nominally Danish royal family, and whoever ruled, the king always ended up being weak. I mean, it would have been difficult for any king, especially in this day and age, to rule such a large geography and diverse set of subjects with different interests. Basically, everyone left the Union so unhappy, the next 300 years, they all just ended up fighting each other over and over again.
Yeah, and fast forward to today, and you can see that not only did Denmark and Sweden break apart, but over time, Norway, Finland, and Iceland found independence. Greenland and the Faroe Islands became constituent countries in the Kingdom of Denmark, and Ireland became an autonomous region in Finland.
So, considering that everybody here mostly has similar looking flags, for the most part, and now they all get along like a happy family, the question is, what would bring back the Kalmar Union again?
And in truth, there have been some attempts to recreate the Kalmar Union in the modern era.
Yeah, so let's go back to the aftermath of World War II. Some of the different national leaders considered actually banding together so they could have a common defense and a common foreign policy based on neutrality. But this collapsed when American reconstruction aid, particularly for Norway and Denmark, was contingent on joining what eventually became NATO.
Yeah, sorry about that. But through the 1950s, there were several discussions about creating an economic and a customs union between Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, and the Nordic Council was founded in 1953. Basically, it was a consultative intergovernment body that still exists today. Now, over time, they developed a common passport and a common labor market, but further economic integration was preempted by the precursors to the EU, like the EFTA and the EEC.
So, given all this, if there was a collapse of the EU or NATO, the Nordic states, in theory, could look to each other and unify to strengthen their own interests by banding back together again.
So, what would the new Kalmar Union actually look like? Now, assuming that all the countries of the Nordic Council did unify, we would probably use their modern borders today instead of those from the 1500s. We don't want any more new wars. The new Kalmar Union would be pretty impressive, actually.
Yeah, when you look at it, so the population of the new Kalmar Union would be roughly 27.5 million citizens. That means if the Kalmar Union joined the EU by itself, it'd be the 5th most populous country.
Yeah, and the land area would be massive with 3.5 million square kilometers of territory. To put that in perspective, it's roughly the size of France, Germany, and Italy combined. It would make it the 7th largest country in the world, besting India by 250,000 square kilometers.
That's a pretty big comparison to have. On top of it, the new Kalmar Union would share a western border with Russia, a southern border with Germany, and now a new border with Canada, thanks to Hans Island in the Arctic.
Yeah, and when it comes to language, the new Kalmar Union would have 9 official languages. It would have 9 regional languages as well.
So with this, it's not just the language diversity, the landscape is equally diverse as well. Mountain ranges, forests, farmlands, islands, lakes, spanning 2 different hemispheres all the way from Finland to Greenland.
Yeah, but now how about the economic might? So given all the concerns about energy these days, a new Kalmar Union would be an energy powerhouse.
Yeah, think about it. The new Kalmar Union would have the massive deep sea oil reserves of Norway and to a lesser extent Denmark in the North Sea. The Danes also get to contribute more in the form of their North Sea wind farms. And on top of that, you have all the hydroelectric dams that are in Sweden and Iceland's famous geothermal power. That's a lot of energy.
Yeah. There would also be great natural wealth, and this includes timber from Norway and Sweden and Finland. Sweden is already the EU's largest producer of iron ore and mines and other minerals like uranium, tungsten, copper, silver, and gold. Finnish exports in refined petroleum and automobiles would further bolster the Kalmar Union's economy. And not to be outdone by them, we have Icelandic fishing and aluminum smelting.
Can't forget the Icelandic there. On top of that, Denmark would be the Kalmar Union's agricultural heartland. As we've talked before, you'd have over 60% of Denmark under land cultivation for agriculture. Greenland also gets to contribute significantly with all their fishing exports. And while it's banned today, they could have future oil exploration. And the west coast of Greenland alone, there's about 18 billion barrels of crude oil that's estimated, and there's double that on the east coast as well. But in all likelihood, the new Kalmar Union would be very green and considerate and probably not overturn that back on oil exploration.
But still, in total, the new Kalmar Union would have a GDP of roughly $1.9 trillion. That would be the 10th largest economy in the world, between Italy and Brazil. And a GDP per capita of $69,000, which would place it 14th in the world, or roughly the same place that Denmark is today.
So we talked a lot about the geography, the economics, but how about some of the basics? You know, the name, the flag, a capital, a royal family.
Sure, the fun stuff to imagine. So for a name, the Kalmar Union is probably a bit old-fashioned, but maybe the Nordic Council could be upgraded and it could become the Nordic Union.
That's a pretty good name. Now, the flag probably needs to have a Nordic cross. I mean, it descended from heaven after all, but what color combination to use? The old Kalmar Union flag was yellow and red, but maybe let's toss in a bit of blue and white.
Yeah, and for a capital, the Nordic Council does use Copenhagen as its headquarters because it's probably most central, but picking one of the current capitals would possibly be not good. So a lot of countries like the US, Australia, and Brazil have invented new capital cities to avoid existing regional rivalries, which perhaps the Nordics would fall into. I mean, Denmark is creating a floating energy island, and Norway has built bridges and tunnels to connect far-flung islands. So who's to say that all of this Nordic engineers can't just do something similar to that and create a new capital?
That'd be pretty impressive for sure. But most importantly, how about a royal family? I mean, Finland and Iceland don't have a monarchy today, but they spent the vast part of the last millennium with some sort of monarch in charge. And looking back to the family trees, let's look at it. So the current Norwegian royal family got its start with Haakon VII, who was actually born a Danish prince in Copenhagen. The Swedish royal family today isn't actually Nordic in its origin. The family of the House of Bernadotte started with King Charles XIV John, and he was actually a marshal under Napoleon while fighting in France that was put into Sweden.
But the royal families are all constitutional monarchs and related to each other anyway. They have very little power, so it might make sense to just scrap them in the new Kalmar Union. But still, since the first Kalmar Union was started under Margareta I, it might make sense to have the sequel started under Margareta II, her namesake.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sequels are always better when they have a little connection to the first. So how about some other fun stuff? I mean, the new Kalmar Union, you knew I would do this here. It's going to be an absolute Winter Olympics powerhouse. Think about it. If you combine it up, they'd have 757 total Olympic medals, and that includes that single bronze for Denmark in women's curling, 1998. If you compare that, the USA is second with 330. Huge advantage.
They'd also be an elite hockey country on par with Canada and Russia, and they'd likely be a very strong footballing nation as well. Plus, you can basically just give them the handball gold medal every single year.
Yeah, the hardest part's going to be making the team, but probably the biggest negative of the new Kalmar Union, it's going to have to be Eurovision.
Wait, why?
Well, between them, they have 14 wins today, but think about it. Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Iceland, when they all compete, I think at least 3 out of the 5 of them will make the finals every single year.
Okay, yeah, so Sweden and then like 2 to 4 of the others.
Of course, Sweden's in. We know that. But, so let's say you have Sweden and then 2 other Nordic countries in the final. So when Swedes go to vote, we know they can't vote for their own song, no matter how good it is. Who are they going to go vote for now? They can't vote for the normals anymore.
Okay, I follow you. So they would usually vote for one of the other Nordic countries that would make the finals, but they can't vote for them now, right?
It's a contradiction. So they're all in the same country. So what are they going to do? So right now it's very easy. Do they plan? So whatever Nordic neighbor they choose about. But when they're all competing in the Kalmar Union together, will Sweden be as powerful as they are today without these four countries always giving them 8, 10 in the Douze Points every single year?
No, I get it. Like for all the big numbers of the Olympic medals and there's also still some uncertainty and some negatives, kind of like the Eurovision example. There'd be some dilution of power because they would only have one vote in bodies like the UN, the EU, or NATO instead of 5 like they currently do.
Yeah, and on top of that, not only diluting, they have similarities on the surface, but these also are countries that like to have things their own particular way. I mean, Iceland and Norway have avoided joining the EU altogether, partly to protect some of the key industries they have. And even within the Kingdom of Denmark, Greenland and the Faroe Islands actually are not part of the EU. Kind of a weird nuance. On top of that, Sweden and Finland have held on to neutrality for many, many years until just recently. And even though they're part of the EU, Sweden and Denmark both have special carve-outs to avoid using the euro, while Denmark still has one other carve-out remaining around their own home affairs.
So would it actually work? I mean, already today, the various Nordic countries have very similar political and economic models, so this would make blending the governments relatively easy, all things considered, especially since the Nordic Council already exists, and that creates a culture of sharing.
Sure, it may do that, but these are countries that are fiercely proud of who they are, their unique heritage, their unique history, their unique culture, and the dozens of wars they fought against each other. But it'd be tough for them to have to give up that uniqueness just to come into a single union. Honestly, the same problem they had with the original Kalmar Union.
Sounds also familiar to the US. But it would also take something really dramatic to have these countries give up what they have now, which is kind of a perfect blend of both worlds. The citizens of all Nordic countries can already work and live in any of the other Nordic countries. And even though Norway and Iceland are outside of the EU, they have relatively frictionless trade with the EU countries, and they're also members of the EFTA. So soon, all 5 nations being members of an even larger military alliance like NATO would kind of make it, I don't know, unnecessary.
Yeah, you might say if it ain't broke, don't fix it, unless something comes along and does break the current situation.
Yeah, but that's not to say that it isn't fun to think about whether Queen Margrethe should get to rule over Sweden, just like her namesake did in the 1300s. But I don't know how well that would go over.
It's fun to think about. You know what? It's fun to have a little speculation like this.
Yeah, and it could cause some rivalries and maybe some tensions among countries that genuinely do have a very good, healthy diplomatic relationship. But if you want to hear about a Nordic nation having a diplomatic issue with an otherwise friendly country, you can watch this video right here about Denmark's whiskey war with Canada. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hi.